Okay, it is Wednesday, January the 9th, 2019, and welcome to week 2 of Introduction to Corrections. And last week we had an open house, and during the open house I covered a lot of information, a lot of details that are very important for you to go back and look at if you have concerns about any assignments, but especially the course project. I spent a lot of time details going over the course project and gave you all the requirements that are necessary so that it should minimize the number of questions that you have. But if you still have questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. Tonight, we're going to cover the first assignment of the course project, and I'm going to go over the materials tonight, talk a little bit about what the module is about this week. I have previously sent you the posts, the PowerPoints rather, for this week, chapter 4, and you should have those and be able to use those to help you in preparing for your assignments for this week. Again, I noticed that several of you who took the quiz didn't do as well as you could, but you have to remember what I said during the open house, that I recommend that you take the quiz at the end of the week, which is the Sunday after assignments are issued. So that would be the Sunday coming up, which is the due date for week 2 assignments. However, I don't think there's a quiz this week, but the next time there is a quiz, because there are only 5 quizzes, and so you have 4 more to go. And you want to make sure that you maximize your scores on those quizzes. Very important. But I provide direction and information to help you. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to say before I start sharing my screen is to be sure to look at my feedback that I have that will be provided in the rubric. At the bottom is a section for feedback, and I'll tell you what you missed or what you can do better in terms of getting your papers to A papers. So with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. Okay. And move that picture up here. So now, again, I give you my instructor information and some information that I covered in detail, reminding you of the way that you can reach out to me and what the rule is for the time period of reaching out to me. The most, I give my students more time than a lot of other professors, and it means what it says. It is not a joke. It's meant to make you smile, but have you understand how I feel about student success and being available to my students. And then I remind you in bold print rubrics and APA and critical thinking are very important. And then also I talked to you last week about Grammarly, making sure that you run your papers through Grammarly. Told you about how to set up your Grammarly account under the Resources tab, and to make sure that you run every paper that you do. Now, you don't have to do your discussion posts through Grammarly, so that I will be able to see how you're doing with critical thinking, and you'll be able to see before you submit your papers what critical thinking you need to add. And I've explained to you what critical thinking is. I cover that extensively. Almost every professor will or should. And then I've given you rules about how you can lose points with APA and not doing research as well. And then I gave you some valuable resources on the course homepage to help you. This is a critical thinking video that you could copy and paste and look at it. And then I remind you that rubrics are located in each weekly assignment. Except the discussion post, we have one rubric that covers that. And so it brings me down to when lectures take place. Today, Wednesday, every other Wednesday, beginning tonight, which is January 9th, week 2, which is where we are now. So then you'll have week 4, week 6, week 8, and week 10. So you'll have 4 more lectures after today. You will also see recordings down here. There's a link given down here where you could see the recording. You will note that you will see some information sent to you telling you that certain periods that WebEx recordings are not available. It will not affect you because what I do is I have been doing this for many quarters, converting my WebEx to YouTube so that you can use YouTube. And it has been beneficial to my students because sometimes there are issues with WebEx, as you are aware that's coming up, I think, this weekend, and it happens periodically during the quarter. But it doesn't affect my classes because of the fact that I make sure that my students have YouTube, which is available all the time. Okay. So now, again, there's some resources over here. The welcome announcement is still up there. You can go back and look at that. It'll be there a while. But now let's take a look at our announcement for this week, week 2, which says that our topic is sentencing and the correctional process. And to prepare for this, you would read section 4 of the text and look at the activities, sentencing issues and sentencing definitions, which we will be talking about during the course of this lecture. And then it reminds you that the lecture is taking place today at 8:30 p.m. And it provides, again, the link for you as well. And then a reminder about your assignment, discussion post, goals and philosophy of sentencing. Your initial post was due last night, which is Tuesday the 8th at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that your reply post is due this Saturday by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. So hope you're not confused by what happened during week 1. And then finally, your written assignment consists of 2, determinate or indeterminate sentencing. And I'm going to go over the requirements for that by just simply sharing with you again something that you can see yourself, the due date and the rubric. And then the first of the 4 assignments for the course project. Let's see, because you'll have week 2, week 4, week 7, and week 9. So course project selection. So this is a selection of agency and contact person. Must have the agency and the contact person. I've already specified to you what the agencies are during the course of last week, but I will repeat again one more time that the types of agency is jail, prison, probation, or parole. Some of you might say, okay, why are you repeating this? And the reason is because students inevitably in every quarter will try to do their assignments on law enforcement, which is police, or they'll try to do it on the courts, which is not corrections. I always say that corrections are the correct, and that only comes about after a disposition has reached in the case that you're charged with, that a person is charged with. They either pled guilty, which puts them in the corrections section, or they're found guilty, which subjects them to the corrections section. Okay? And so you're going to determine. And then I also stated that I encourage students to try to do their course project in the type of agency or organization that they desire to work in their careers. And many of you will have ideas. It's okay to switch up, and it's okay to work outside of it. But oftentimes I try to remind students to try to begin to be centered in the direction that you desire to operate once you graduate and complete your education. In other words, make a career. It's like everything I did when I was in college pointed towards moving me in the direction of being a lawyer, including where my job was, which I covered that in detail in the open house. So it's something that will benefit you, but again, it's not a requirement that you do it that way. Again, and that assignment is due, both of those assignments, this Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then my admonition to you is to continue to be strong and finish strong. Get that into your spirit, so that is something that you don't have to think about. It's like breathing. Think about doing a good job, putting your best foot forward, not rushing. Remember that you're not completing assignments for a grade. You're completing assignments for knowledge and for application to help you understand the criminal justice field and to help you to be able to be prepared for a future career or either an advancement in the career that you have in criminal justice. So strong work habits will help you to achieve success in all your endeavors. And then adversity is the springboard to success. I covered that in detail, explaining that to you, but I do remind you that you're always going to have something that may detract you. As we say, there's a saying, life happens, and we recognize that, and we appreciate that, and factor that into what we consider in terms of each and every single student. At least that's what I do. So having said that, given that, let's look at the module itself. And let's see, first of all, again, going over the assignments. Okay, and so now it's determinate or indeterminate sentencing. So it tells you what to do in first bullet point and determine whether your state uses determinate or indeterminate sentencing, and include a philosophy, and then second, argue which of these two types you think is more effective, and if you think it's more effective, why? Even if your state has the opposite of what you think would be more beneficial. And you're going to make sure you do follow the APA format, which I've harped on. And again, it reminds you of where you can find resources. It says you can find information about APA on the resources tab, but you can also find it on the course homepage that I provide for all of my students to help you as well. And then I encourage students that if you're having trouble after that is to, if I see that you're having trouble, I'm going to make a referral to tutoring, and we have some dynamic students some of which are my former students, that will be able to help you deal with APA and other issues concerning the assignment. It is good when you have a peer who can help you, and they also understand the assignment. Now, they will not tell you how to do the assignment because that would be unethical, and they're not going to do that. But what they will do is they will help you to understand the system so that you can perform very well. So let's take a look at what the rubric says. You click on this, as you know, that's how you start it, and it tells you when your assignment is due. That's the due date and the time. And it tells you the maximum points for this assignment is 25. And then if you go to the rubric, let's take a look at it. It will tell you, whoops, go back. Okay, it will tell you first the quality, content, and accuracy of information, which is the biggest portion. For 60% or 15 points, it tells you what you need to do, and it reminds you of the 2-page minimum length requirement. 2 pages mean 2 pages. We're not trying to make you stretch out stuff, but it is our firm belief that in order to submit an academic paper and adequately address the issues that are presented in the assignments, that it should take a minimum of 2 pages. Now, keep in mind that 2 pages does not include the cover page, and it does not include the reference page. And it's very important. Make sure you use 12-point font, 12-point Roman. That's the way you should have your typeset, and your margin should be proper, and then double-spaced, and citations in the body, not just a citation, but citations throughout the body, and references at the end. So it is very important that you have that information and make sure that you do that. And if you listen to me very carefully, you will also discover too this, is that when I grade your paper, I will look to see if you satisfied this, how much of this. And if you haven't satisfied the requirements, then I will deduct points. And then I will, in your grade book, you will see, when you look at the rubric, you will see my, what they call remarks at the bottom after you see this box in the grade book. And it will tell you that normally I start out by saying something that I really do mean. I appreciate the time and effort that you put into completing the assignment, and then I go into, you know, what was good about your assignment and what was bad about it, and what you can do to make sure that you don't lose any points. And then the second part, organization, content, grammar, and punctuation, it tells you the things that we concentrate on. Make sure you write your paper in paragraphs. Paragraphs should be an average of 5 to 6 sentences. They should transition between the concepts and ideas separate. And then also it tells you what should be in your paragraphs. I don't conduct a writing class here, but I do look for basic information, and of course your grammar, and of course your spelling, and punctuation errors. And again, reminds you about the 2-page minimum requirement. And then the final part of it for 5% deals with APA, the citations and references. Citations and references. And also that all sources are listed. Sources are from your research and should be credible resources. Never use Wikipedia or other generic type resources. Wikipedia is the #1 offender that students try to use, and you will lose points every time you do that. So that's how you get your 25 points. All right. So that's for that assignment. Now, let's go to the next one. I'm not going to go over the discussions because the discussions are self-explanatory, and you're going to provide those according to the requirements that I already previously stated. And then your course project. So this is the first of your course projects, which I elaborately detailed last week in the open house. Open house is a very valuable one. It's lengthy, but take time to listen to it because it will save you a lot of, how should I say, loss of points. It'll save you a lot of problems in the next 10 weeks as we go forth. So in this, it tells you, in this assignment, because some people have already asked me, did they just have to provide the agency and contact person? I said, read the content of the module and or the rubric. So it says in a paragraph or two, describe the agency that you've selected. Include a sentence or two as to why you selected this agency. Then in another paragraph, identify the person that you'll interview and provide their contact information, which consists usually of an email and or phone number as well. And, you know, it tells you again what we've been talking about, that when you reached out to the person to do that, you're demonstrating communication as a transferable skills. And you always want to be professional when you're reaching out to contacts, okay? And so you're going to submit this. Now, you're going to see this. Okay, I'm going to go when it's due. It's due this Sunday. Please, I encouraged people last week to start checking on this, but don't wait. You know, people inevitably, here's what people do. They'll withhold doing this because they said, well, we couldn't get the interview. You don't have to do the interview yet. The interview is a ways off. Right now, just follow the steps. And you're going to, this is the first section that's going to be of your final paper. And you want to have this. Okay, so now let's look at the rubric. So for 10 points, it's going to tell you what to do. Okay? And then for 2 points, again, basic paragraph spelling, punctuation, and things like that. And then finally, now the APA basically is the organization that you're going to have the citations and then that kind of thing. I'm not really that dogmatic about APA in this assignment because of the kind of assignment it is. However, though, I do hope that people will consider when they write the paragraphs explaining why they selected the agency and those kind of things. So then you might be able to share in the body the citation about the organization or the entity or the individual, and then your reference about the source, maybe a website or whatever it is that you have concerning the organization for APA. And that's what I'm going to be looking for. So you get 15 points for that. So again, I'm going to say this, is that the idea is you're building a house. Let's put it like this, and you start from the basement up. Well, this is the basement right here. This is the first assignment. Now, you want to keep this because you want to do a good job on it, because the information that you provide in this portion, as I said last week, would be good if you could use that as when you do your final paper, when your final paper is due in week 9, you're going to need to have these, put a subtopic, that's organization of your paper. And you're going to have the information that you covered in week 2. Then when you get to week 4, you're going to do the same thing. When you get to week 7, you're going to have the same thing. And then finally, your final paper due in week 9. And so that is the assignment. I've explained all the details that you need to do for that. All right. So now let's go. And I encourage students to listen to the whole lecture all the way through because we don't get together. And I do these lectures even weeks with the open house in the first week because I do it for you as students. The requirement, if you go back and look at the syllabus, is that I just have to do one session a quarter. So I could theoretically have done the one in week 1 and be done. I don't have to do any lectures. I used to do them every week, but because students don't attend in big numbers, as today we have 1 student so far, the point of the matter is that you can ask questions that come up, you can make notes, and you can contemporaneously have me the same way you would have me if you were in a classroom. And I make myself available to answer any questions. If you have any questions during the course of this and you want to do so, just type in the chat box and then I'll see it. Otherwise, I'll just keep going on to give you information. Because, again, my goal is to help you to achieve student success. And I'm committed to that, as you'll learn. Those of you who are first-timers, if you talk to anybody who's had me before, and I'm not talking people who had to repeat the course, but people who know how Richard Wright, Professor Wright, rolls, that he's very strong in terms of student communication with me. Some professors aren't like that, but don't try to think of me as others. I'm an individual. I treat you as an individual as well. So today, under the Lessons tab, we're going to talk about what is sentencing about, why sentencing, and the difference between determinate and indeterminate sentencing, which feeds into your assignment. And by the way, make sure you do research. You know, usually there's a website that's available to let you know. And then research what the differences are between them. But you're going to hear me just comment about them. And then a little bit about mandatory sentencing, truth in sentencing. As you probably should know, I'm a big fan of truth in sentencing. After what I shared with you that happened in my childhood with the criminal justice system and what led me into becoming a lawyer and ultimately into becoming a police officer for a while, becoming a paralegal, becoming an investigator, and having worked with probation officers, parole officers, and also correction officers as well. So very important sentencing. People should get a sentence that's commensurate with the crime itself, considering all the circumstances that are involved. And so I think you already know from me, if you learn that I'm a strong advocate of rehabilitation. And the reason why I'm a strong advocate of rehabilitation is because people are not kept behind bars forever. They're going to return to the system. And so I think that what I feel is the most beneficial to society is to have whatever problems that cause that person to find themselves in the criminal justice system or being placed in the correction section, get that corrected. So if a person has drug problem, then we need to address those issues, alcohol problems, and whatever the issues are. Sometimes there are domestic violence issues, and there needs to be some serious counseling, those kinds of things. Things that will help the individual, because as you should already be aware, that if you take a person and don't treat the issue that created the problem, if you don't treat it, they're going to be recidivists. That means they're going to come again and again, and either they're going to hurt somebody or kill somebody in the process, even if they're nonviolent offenders, could result in a violent offense. So, you know, and I already have said this. If you take my course, Drugs and Crime, you'll hear me talk about this. I'll be teaching that this quarter in T2, Term 2, that there is a strong correlation between drugs and crime, and they go hand in hand. So anyway, we're going to talk about today sentencing issues, definitions of sentencing, and then I've already talked about the written assignment, discussion, and the course project. So with that in mind, let's talk about sentencing issues. So now, there are various theories that you guys have already had a chance to deal with: deterrence. You've dealt with rehabilitation. You dealt with other methods or philosophies of punishment. And so the point of the matter is that retribution is one as well. But the key thing is that it says here that we want to deter people, and believing that the fear of punishment will deter or prevent crime is kind of not really working. And so it doesn't, as I said, the person who is placing that kind of approach, deterrence, is saying, if you get caught and you get incarcerated, that you should think twice before you commit another crime. Well, that sounds good, but it's not in reality how it operates, because there are many other factors. As you probably should know and be aware, that when a person is incarcerated, that is, they spend time in jail, but especially if they spend time in prison and then are released later on parole, then that person, while they're incarcerated, whether they were innocent or guilty, and as you already know, there are many innocent individuals that they discover never committed the crimes, but what they are going to be exposed to is surviving in the system, and they will pick up habits that they didn't have before. And then they will come out, and then they will carry those on, and then they will really become criminals. Or either, as I say, that you want to get a degree in criminology, and I'm not talking about the formal degree, but the street degree in criminology is go to prison. And that's where you learn how to be a criminal in prison, from those individuals either who are repeat offenders before you, or either individuals who are lifers that aren't going anywhere. So some believe that incapacitation, that when you isolate those individuals, would also assist in crime prevention, but it does, as we already established, if you're incarcerated for that period, you're going to not commit crimes outside. You can commit crimes inside. But the point of the matter is that you will not affect the public unless you escape until that period is over. But it says here in our comments, and I agree, it says research does not show that incapacitation reduces recidivism. And I already told you what recidivism is. Recidivism is very simply the repeating of an offense or other offenses that will result in you being incarcerated. I can tell you that during the course of the years that I started practicing in 1978 until I retired in 2000, I saw individuals come into the system and they would get out, they'd come back again, and I also saw some of their children or younger relatives become clients as well, because they would reproduce criminals, because that's what they were. And so what I'm saying is that we have to get to the root of the problem. And so, with that being said, that incapacitation is not the big deal. The concept of rehabilitation, and with rehabilitation, we want to give that person a new direction, attitude to reduce their crime. And so, in the course of rehabilitation, you're going to discover during the course here that things that deal with rehabilitation, such as addressing issues like if that person has a drug problem or they don't have any education, allowing them to get education while they're incarcerated. There are people outside who says, why should they get education while they're incarcerated? The reason is because it has already been statistically demonstrated that it is cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. And not only that, it is better for society that individuals be educated than continuously incarcerated over and over and over again. And the other thing is job skills. You'll be surprised at there are individuals who end up in the system because of the fact that they didn't even know how to even write a check. They didn't even know how to balance a checkbook. They didn't know how to do simple tasks. And getting individuals employment will help them, but developing a skill. In many facilities now, for example, and I have friends that I know who are barbers, they actually have barber colleges that allow individuals who are incarcerated to learn the skills of a barber, which give them an ability to be able to do something to make a good living and also give them an education. And many of them are able to be licensed in the jurisdictions so that when they do come out, they become barbers. So those kind of things, beauticians. And there are also people who work on vehicles, so they become mechanics. So the bottom line is to build that person up, build that individual with an ability to be able to support their family. A lot of people commit crimes to support themselves. I had people who would steal a loaf of bread because they were hungry, and they would end up in the system, not very long, but sometimes while they were waiting bond, they were exposed to bad situations. But the point of the matter is that we need to fix the problems there. And we who are in the criminal justice system understand that. That's what parole officers are going to be doing, and that's what probation officers are going to be doing. Police officers are starting to do it now. With you discover with drugs, individuals, is there programs called deflection, which again I won't go into detail, which I cover in my drugs and crime course, which instead of arresting a person when they find some drugs on them or possession of a certain amount, then they will recognize that individual needs some help, and rather than arresting them and getting them a record, is to give them a chance to get the actual help, because drug use is a medical issue. It's a disease, as you already know about the opioid epidemic. Again, we'll not cover that much, but these are things that factor into our corrections system and dealing with rehabilitation. Second chance programs, giving individuals a chance to do that. And so anyway, there are so many philosophies of punishment but that result in the basis for sentencing options. So sentences are generally, I should say this, depending on whether it's determinate or indeterminate sentencing, at some point the judge is going to do it, but the judge is going to order the sentencing or determine what the sentence of an individual is. But the jurisdictions will determine by whether or not they're indeterminate or determinate sentencing. So what is the difference? Well, with indeterminate sentencing, the judge is given more flexibility to be able to give a person a sentence. There are times when individuals can qualify for probation and situations where there's indeterminate sentencing, and the judge can also do that. But be aware that whether it's determinate or indeterminate, it is generally what the legislature has laid out that that person, depending on the offense that they are charged with, which, by the way, the prosecutor or the state's attorney has the right to determine what charges individuals are. Of course, within the context of whatever the crime that that person committed. So you can't charge a person with murder and no one was killed, those kind of things. But so indeterminate sentencing gives the judge more flexibility. Determinate sentencing, the legislature has more control, and certain sentences are set out. For example, one of the states that has determinate sentencing and is my state, Illinois. You'll discover when you do research that Illinois has determinate sentencing. But determinate sentencing did not come to Illinois until 1977 when House Bill 1500 was introduced, which was the first major change in the Criminal Code of 1961. Yours truly knows a lot about that because when I was in law school at Northwestern, I graduated in 1978, but my senior research project that I did for my graduation requirement was to research House Bill 1500 and help with research to determine things like Class X felonies, repeat offenders, and other type of crimes that are used now where a person doesn't even qualify for probation if they commit these offenses. And so determinate sentencing is where the judge's hands are tied. But as it says here, the guidelines limit the judge's discretion, particularly when they include presumptive sentencing, as I was talking about determinate sentencing, and mandatory minimum sentences. That's also found generally in both of them, but the range is greater in indeterminate as opposed to determinate. So some jurisdictions have a mixture of both. However, though, most jurisdictions have one or the other, and reasons why the legislature changed. The reason why the legislature changed in 1977 was because individuals didn't seem to be, they're getting slaps on the wrist, and to try to change that. Now, even since that time, it has progressed that they used to have what we call good time, and you heard me talking about that last week, where if a person committed a crime, they served a day for a day. So if the sentence was 10, it really meant 5. And then for good behavior further, they could get some more time cut off, as in the case the person who killed my mom was 1.5 years off. And so rather than serving 5 years, they served 3.5. But most jurisdictions have done away with good time. So you don't have good time that takes place when you are sentenced. 10 means 10. And then there's usually a percentage, a high percentage that you have to serve even before you qualify for parole. Be aware of the fact that there are some offenses that are not, you're not eligible for parole based on it. So that's how sentencing operates. And so it is important, as it says, to understand the options and the reasons for them and what is involved. And so there are organizations within the criminal justice system that operate utilizing these systems, such as those individuals who are probation officers, parole officers. And then, you know, you have the jail and the prisons. Notice again, we're talking about those four. I'll just tell you up front this so you'll know and you're going to learn that when we get further into it, but I'll just tell you this now. Probation and parole, you can't even operate as a probation or parole officer unless you have a bachelor's degree. You're going to learn that, and you're going to hear it over and over. You can be a corrections officer or a jailer without that. However, most jurisdictions are moving further into higher education levels, so it's very important. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes to go. Let's look at some of these sentencing definitions. I think I'm going to have to allow this to come on. It will pop up. There we go. Okay, so now you'll hear these terms as relate to sentencing, and we've already talked about. So what is general deterrence? Flip it over. It says what we talked about earlier, punishment to prevent others from committing crimes. And it says the idea that severely punishing the convicted will deter others. We have already discussed that, and deterring factors don't really work very, very well because of the fact, famous last words that are often used, I didn't get caught. Well, you know, the definition of a criminal is a person who is caught committing a crime. If you're never caught committing a crime, then you're not a criminal, even though you might be committing a criminal act, if you understand what I'm saying. But the time will run out on you there. So the point of the matter is that deterrence doesn't work. Now, when we get to things like the death penalty, for example, somebody says, well, doesn't that work? Yeah, only for the individual that commits the offense, because they're not going to commit any more offenses, because if they're executed, they're not. But other individuals see that person, that doesn't stop them from committing murder or any other crimes that qualify for the death penalty, because there are other issues that are involved. So that's what we mean by general deterrence. Specific deterrence focuses on the person, so that the person should learn that crime does not pay. And we already have discussed that, so I won't go into details there. That really is the same status as general deterrence, this deterrence period. Incapacitation, when that person is restrained to protect society. In other words, they're put behind bars, they're put in a position where they can't do anything. Again, does that really help the individual with recidivism? Answer is no. Once again, it doesn't point them in the direction. Okay. Selective incapacitation, same thing. Repeat offenders, you get longer sentences. Doesn't matter, as I already said, the longer the sentence, the more you'll be exposed to the activity of individuals who are criminals, and therefore you find yourself in situations where, you know, you didn't go in as a criminal. Your mindset, in order to survive there, turns out to be you join in to survive. Just deserts. The definition of just deserts is pretty much what it says. In other words, you get what's coming to you. So the punishment is commensurate with the seriousness of the offense. So you should be aware that felonies, which are individuals who are sentenced for over a year, those who are sentenced for under a year are misdemeanors. The more severe offense, or the most serious offenses, are in the felony portion. And then there are degrees of felony crimes as well. You will discover that in felony crimes, those that involve crimes against the individual as opposed to against property are more severe, because we consider life more important than property, which should be anyway. And so if you commit a crime like battery or assault, then you'll end up in probation If you have a DUI, driving under influence, and it doesn't result in death or something like that, you will probably find yourself in a misdemeanor stage where the sentence is less time. And you should be aware too, and again, this is just again sharing some information that's coming ahead, is that you will find that those who are committed to misdemeanors generally are in jail, which is more locally. You're held within the community. It's even near the courthouse oftentimes. But those who are over a year, or they end up in prison. Now, you can spend over a year in jail awaiting trial if you're not able to make bail or bail wasn't afforded to you in the situation. But the point of the matter is that I'm just giving you some little extra stuff to kind of help you out a little bit here to explain that when it says punishment is commensurate with the seriousness, by giving you the division of how we operate on dealing with felonies as opposed to misdemeanors. Okay. Whoops. Okay. I think I skipped one, but okay. Let's go flip it over again. It says the equity goal of punishment, which means that the offender pays back the victim, like restitution or fees to the system itself, because it costs money for the system to take an individual through trial, and so that's what that's all about. So it's more towards paying the system back. Then there is the concurrent sentence, which is a monster. Now, what it means is what it says. Concurrent means runs alongside, okay? So what that means, for example, if I'll give you an idea. Okay, let's flip it over so you can see. It says convicted of 2 or more crimes. You have to have 2 or more in order to have concurrent. The sentence begins on the same day and are completed when the longest has run. So let's say you're sentenced to a crime that gives you 5 years and a crime that gives you 10 years. You don't do 15 years if it's concurrent. What you do is you do when the longest one is completed based upon the system that it's operating under, then that sentence is maxed out. I can tell you that I'm aware of an individual who was reported was guilty of 120 years. Well, that's how the media reported it, but what they really had was 4 terms of 30 years, which meant that actually they served each 1/4 of it. So if it's 24 hours in a day, they served 6 hours of each one of those 4 each day. So that meant that they, rather than serving 120, they only had 30, and then that's how it operated. So the sentences ran next to each other concurrent. Consecutive is the opposite. Means what it says, you complete the one, and then then the second sentence begins. So in the case that I just told you, then you'll be sentenced to the 5 years for one, complete that, and then you'd start the 10 years for the other. That's the difference, okay? And consecutive sentencing is something that the judges usually have some authority to determine based upon the offenses themselves. So which one gets you the longest period? Consecutive. Determinate sentencing, which you already talked about, the fixed term of years, maximum established by the law, the legislature. That's what we talked about. And then indeterminate is the opposite. Early release from a correctional institution after they serve a required minimum portion of the sentence itself. All right. Again, in indeterminate sentencing, where that person Um, it no, there's no exact amount that is given for the date. It could vary. Presumptive sentencing guidelines, legislature sets the penalties, and that's pretty much with every jurisdiction. But the judge then, again, and remember once again, the prosecution can always circumvent that by reducing the charges. Mandatory minimum sentence, which means this is the least that you can get. So, for example, with Class X felonies, as we said in Illinois, you get them 6 to 30. And so that meant that the range was, the minimum was 6. You couldn't go below 6. You couldn't give a person 5 years for the crime that's specified. Okay? And so again, that ties the judge's hands there, though it does still give him some leeway. But remember, here's the deal, the way judges operate. They operate on, and once you get to sentencing in itself, and I was involved in some sentencing, there's what we call mitigation and aggravating circumstances. Mitigation are things that, for example, are presented by usually the defense to try to determine that the person gets the least amount of time for the offense that they're found guilty of. The aggravation is where it's determined that that person is a repeat offender, or either the crime was done maliciously or in a heinous fashion. Then you can be aware that there's more aggravation rather involved in serious offenses than those involving less serious. So put another way, you'll probably have more aggravation involved with a attack on a person resulting in injury or death, as opposed to committing a robbery or burglary. If you commit a robbery, that's different too, because a robbery, you put a person in jeopardy of fearing for their life, and those kinds of things, and burglary as well. So anyway, the point of the matter is that it specifies a certain number of years of incarceration for a crime. That's what mandatory minimum is. Three strikes law, we call it the Habitual Offender Act, which means that repeat offenders receive long sentences with no parole for conviction for a third felony. Now, some jurisdictions apply this the way that I think it should probably be applied, is that they should be violent offenses. And if they're violent offenses, then, but if it's nonviolent, like for example, possession of drugs, let's say for example you have 2 possession of gun cases, okay, that's if you get caught a third one, well then you got the 3-strike issue, because you know the situation with guns, all right. But let's say you had 2 guns and then you got caught with some drugs. Well, it's a felony. However, though, there should be some addressing the issue of that third one, and not throw that right away on the habitual offender. Now, some jurisdictions like California, they're different with it. They're more strict. They say third felony, and it doesn't say whether it's a violent or nonviolent, but that's what habitual offender. In other words, the key thing is if you keep committing crime, you're going to get a longer sentence. And that makes sense. But once again, I already addressed that issue with saying we need to fix that by dealing with rehabilitating that individual. Truth in sentencing, we talked about that. Requires offenders serve a substantial portion of the sentence and the actual time served. And so they should actually serve more rather than less of their sentence. So at one time, you should be aware that when a person was sentenced to life, that didn't mean they were there for life. But now most jurisdictions, including our jurisdiction, Illinois, when you are sentenced for life, it means, as I heard a judge say one time, to an individual that if you are sentenced to life, you will see the outside of the prison unless there's an appeal that's successful. But all things being equal, and that there's no successful appeal to the life sentence, that individual will never see the outside of the prison in terms of living, but will leave with a, as they say, with a tag on the toe, and you know what that means, and horizontal. So that person would be dead. That's how that operates. And that's it for that. That pretty much covers that. Now, I want to just, since we don't have a lecture next week, just kind of, it's 9:30 now, so we should be stopping. But I just want to remind you of next week, probation and intermediate sanctions. I kind of talked about some of that, and then remind you of the assignments that you have next week. Restorative justice, again, same process. Click on it, and you'll see when that's due, and then click on the rubric, and then you will see the requirements there for that as well. And then going back, the only other assignment that you should probably see is the discussion. Oh, I'm sorry, incorrect. You're going to see the quiz. I talked about this before, and explaining to you that it's a time quiz. It's 10 minutes. You have 10 questions, and you should know that you shouldn't have your materials out. And it tells you, by starting this exam, you agree to abide by the academic misconduct policy that we went over that you saw in the syllabus, and could result in your being expelled from school. Otherwise, also it'll result in a lower grade because you're not going to have enough time to look this stuff up. So I have said this about the quiz, is that you should take the quiz the Sunday, the last day. That should be your last assignment that you do after you've gone over all of the information and that. So that's what's coming up for next week. And then I will be seeing you back in week 4 for our next light. Okay. 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 All right, Diva. Okay. That's funny. But that's funny. My wife has that same name too, and her name is Julia Ann. So, so anyway, that's funny. Any questions about anything? You can type that in the chat box if you do. Any questions? No questions? Okay. There being none, it's 9:33, and I'm going to say good night to you. And I hope that you will listen to the entire lecture because it's very important. This is a lecture, as a student has already asked me, do I get points for attending the lecture? I says, yeah, you do. The points you get are the points that you end up salvaging for doing your assignments better than you would without the lecture. I can tell you that you already being live here discover there are things that you wouldn't hear or learn just from reading the material and the looking at the module itself and looking at the PowerPoints, but you hear it from me based on my experience and expertise in the area. So I'm going to say good night, and see you in a couple of weeks, or if I hear from you before that. Good night.